Hello again, everyone. I'm Tom, and welcome back to the Maverick Designs Woodworking Shop. In our last video, you guys watched me unbox and mostly assemble my new Sawstop 1.75 horsepower professional cabinet saw. We got to the point where the entire saw was basically put together. The only thing that was left was to install the blade, do the basic squaring and setup, and then make the first cuts, and then I was going to give you my initial thoughts on the saw. However, that video started getting a little long and I decided to cut it into another video, so here we are. That's what we're going to do today. The other thing is that I actually ran into another issue while I was making my first cuts on that saw, and it will be beneficial, I think, hopefully to you, to see what that problem was and how I solved it, because it was a result of a mistake that I made, and now you won't make that same mistake. So if you want to know what that was, stick around for a few more minutes and we'll talk about it a little. Let's get started. Okay, first thing we need to do is install the blade. Here I am raising it up in order to make it easier for me to get to it, and then removing the arbor nut and washer. As you can see, I am installing the Sawstop branded blade that came with the saw. Now, I know there are some hardcore blade gurus out there that will literally gasp in horror at the mere thought of this, but I just can't justify completely discounting something until I've at least tried it for myself. Waste not, want not, and all that. Like I mentioned in the Hercules table saw review video, the blade that came with that saw was really good, surprisingly good. I made a lot of great projects with that blade and it lasted a really long time. I mean, I would almost compare it to a Diablo. So here's where I ran into the first issue I had when I tried to use the supplied wrenches to tighten down the blade, because I'm a knucklehead. There are two wrenches and they are identical to each other. That flat spot on the inside of the blade where you need to hold with one wrench is not the same size as the arbor nut, so I was perplexed as to why they would give me two of the exact same wrenches. What I did not realize is that the closed end of that wrench, the other side of it, is exactly the right size for the arbor nut. Like I said, I'm a knucklehead. In my defense, however, the opening on that side does not even remotely resemble a hexagon, so it didn't dawn on me until later to at least try it. Luckily, I have a huge toolbox full of tools, and I was able to get the job done. Don't judge me. Once I got that figured out, I moved on to the next step of checking the gap between the blade and brake. Okay, since I was in here, I figured I'd give you a closer look so you can see what's going on inside. So that down there is the brake system. And what this tool is you use this bottom edge here to measure the distance between the blade and the brake. As you can see, it's a little bit more distance towards the bottom and closer at the top. So the top is where you actually measure that. And the picture next to this actually shows you right where to measure it at the closest point at the top. So you take this thing and you do it, measure it right here at the top. And as I would have expected, since this is a Sawstop blade, it's already adjusted. This thing fits snugly right here between the blade and the brake, so the adjustment is perfect. My understanding is the farther away that is, it'll still work, but it'll take longer to stop. So you obviously want it to stop as fast as possible if you need it to stop. And that is the correct measurement. Any closer and you run the risk of the blade touching the brake, which will set it off and give you a false activation. The other thing that's also in here is the riving knife is here. And if you want to put the blade guard on, the blade guard has its own riving knife. So you have to remove this one in order to put that one on. But man, is this thing easy to take on and off. You just grab this lever and slide it up. Simple. And this thing pops right out. Put it right back in there. Push the lever back down. And it's back in. It's awesome. All right, so the last thing that it tells you to do is to give the blade a spin to make sure that it's not touching the brake or anything else for that matter. because the last thing you want is for this thing to activate the very first time that you turn it on. Looks good to me. So we can put the cover back, the throat plate back in, and move on to the next step. Okay, so the last steps that it tells you to do is to adjust the fence if necessary. Basically what it tells you is to move the fence up until it's flush with the miter slot. Lock it down and then check it. I don't know if you can see that from here. There's the little edge of the bevel, but it looks to me like this thing is perfectly aligned all the way down. My OCD kicked in a little here, and I checked it not only against the other side of that slot, but also against the other slot as well. As you might imagine, it was similarly good in all places. I considered getting one of those table saw setup gauges that measure the distance between the blade and the miter slot across the span of the blade, but though the manual shows you how to make every possible adjustment, it also specifically says it should not be necessary. I think it's safe to believe that Sawstop set it up properly when they assembled it, being that it's one of the best saws money can buy and all. Maybe down the road after some time and a lot of use, or if you're buying one used, it might be necessary, but on a brand new saw, I'm not going to worry about it unless it becomes a problem. Next, they tell you to make sure that the fence is square against the table, and as expected, it was perfectly square. The last thing to check is to make sure the indicator on the fence accurately depicts the actual size of the cut. So I set the fence to 3 inches per the indicator and then measured the distance between the inside edge of the blade's carbide teeth and the face of the fence. I was somewhat surprised to find that the indicator was off by almost 1/8 of an inch, but it was easily adjusted by actually setting the fence to 3 inches per the measured distance, loosening the 2 screws securing the indicator, sliding it over until it read exactly 3 inches, and then tightening the 2 screws back down. I then double checked at 6 and 10 inches because OCD, and of course it was still good. Since I'm here, I think I'm going to go ahead and install this blade guard. Gotta be safe, right? At least for a YouTube video. No, just kidding. Again, easy. Pull the lever up, pull the riving knife out, grab the blade guard, which has built-in anti-kickback pawls, slide that guy in, seat it on the pins that are in there, just push the lever back down, and that's it. Simple. There's one last but very important thing that needs to be done before I can start cutting on this thing. The cast iron top is absolutely beautiful, but protecting it from rust is an unfortunate necessity if you wish for it to remain that way. Now, I did a lot of research on this, and there are several good ways to protect your cast iron tabletop, but the one that I saw recommended most often was just good old-fashioned Johnson's paste wax. Unfortunately, I don't think they make this anymore, but I have a couple of cans on hand that I expect will last me a good long time. But if you don't have access to any, or don't want to pay $30 or more for a can from the few places that you can find it at, many people have said that Minwax and other brands are acceptable alternatives, as well as several other products that you'll see recommended specifically for this purpose with just a little research. Putting it on is just like any other wax. You make sure you start with a nice clean surface, apply a coat of wax to the top just like you would to your car, let it dry a few minutes, and then buff it off. Wax on, wax off. I strongly suggest you take the time to protect your top with something before using the saw, as well as at regular intervals over the life of your saw. All right, this is the first power on. So once I turn this on, we should get some blinking red lights followed by a solid green. And the solid green light will tell us that the safety feature has been checked and is working properly, and the saw is ready to use. Now, another feature that this thing has is this little yellow thing at the end of the power switch here. You can remove that if you don't want kids or somebody else maybe accidentally turning this thing on or whatever, and they won't be able to do it. It's unless that yellow thing is in place. So if you want to take it out and leave it out, you can do that and just put it in when you use it. Or, I mean, in my case, I think I'm just going to leave it in there. Also, the keys here, this is what allows you to turn off the safety feature if you wish to. For example, a lot of people like to turn it off when they're working with MDF. So we're going to turn this on and see what happens. All right, so we got the blinking red lights. And that's it. Red light's out, green light's solid. That means the saw is ready to go. Let's do our first cut. So obviously there was something wrong there. That's not a normal noise. So I started looking around to see if I could figure out what was going on. I thought maybe the blade guard was rattling or the blade was hitting the throat plate. But I looked around and I couldn't see anything. So I figured, well, let's just turn it on again and see what happens. Maybe it was a fluke and it won't happen again. Okay, this is interesting. Let me unplug this thing. At this point, there was no doubt that there was something wrong, so I pulled off the throat plate to see if I could find any obvious damage from the blade hitting it. I spun the blade to see if it was hitting anything. I couldn't find anything, but I knew there was a problem, so I decided to try to run it again with the throat plate off to see if I could figure it out. Alright, so that weird noise is actually not the blade hitting something. That is some sort of a contact or something inside of the start switch. Now I'm using, I think this is a 14 gauge cord. I'm going to reposition this saw and plug it directly into the outlet if I can and see if that makes a difference. Okay, so Sawstop recommends that you use a 12 gauge extension cord if it's 25 feet or less, and a 10 gauge if it's 25 to 50 feet, and not to use one at all if it's more than 50 feet. I was using, I think it's a 14, but I have now plugged it directly into the wall. That's a 30 amp breaker on that circuit. There's nothing else in the house that's attached to that circuit. So the only thing that's going to be drawing from it is this. I'm hoping now that that will be what the problem was. And if so, that just means I need to buy another extension cord and should be okay. Well, let's cross our fingers and see what happens. Apparently that was the problem. Let's put this back in and make sure. All right, coming on again. All right, that definitely appears to have been what the problem was. So now we know they're not kidding when they say don't use a 14 gauge extension cord. You need 12 or 10. I'm probably going to go buy a 10 just to be on the safe side. And that's all I'll use for here. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a quick update on the whole extension cord issue. So the Sawstop manual says that you should have a 12 gauge extension cord up to 25 feet of length and a 10 gauge extension cord if it's going to be up to 50 feet of length, and they do not recommend that you go any more than 50 feet of length. I don't need even 25 feet. I only needed about 10 to get to where the saw is from the circuit that I use for it. So I found this 10-foot, 10 gauge extension cord on Amazon for like 20 bucks. This thing is a beast of an extension cord. It works perfectly for what I need. I've used it now a few times with the saw and it works great. That problem is now gone. I haven't had it again. And it also doubles as now my extension cord for my DeWalt 735X planer, because it uses the same 30 amp circuit that I do with the saw. So if you're interested in this, I will put a link to it in the description if I can figure out how to do that, so that you can check it out, or find something similar that will suit your needs. All right, back to the cut. All right, I was finally able to make that first cut. I set the fence at 6 inches. The cut went nice and smooth. When I pulled it off and looked at it afterward, there were no blade marks, so I was happy with the performance of the blade, at least so far. I measured across the board from top to bottom, and it was all exactly 6 inches, so I was very happy with the results. Not too bad. I didn't have that hooked up to the dust collection, but you can tell, let me move this real quick, that it actually works pretty well, because it spit everything out down here on the floor. So I ran a few more cuts at increasingly smaller widths, and I double checked everything with the tape measure afterward, and the accuracy was maintained all the way through. The thing cuts great. I'm very happy with it so far. I mean, I can't do a in-depth review at this point. I will do one later. There's only a few things that I would complain about at this point. One, as you know, is the issues that I had with this table, and I had to get kind of creative to get it to level out the way that I wanted it to. For something this expensive, you'd think that that adjustment would have been a little bit better thought out, but it wasn't a huge deal. I had to make a trip to Home Depot, so that was kind of inconvenient, but other than that, it wasn't a big deal. The other thing right off the top of my head that I don't like so much is the push stick that comes with it. It's nice. It's a good size. It's good length. It's thick. It seems very good, but the thing is it's extremely pliable. I mean, it's almost to the point of feeling like rubber. Yeah, I wish it was a little more rigid than this. The one that came with the Hercules was actually, not as wide, not as thick, but it is probably twice as rigid as this one is. So, that's one thing that I think they could have done better on. To be honest, I don't use these very often. When I do, it's usually to hold something against the fence while I'm pushing with my hand if it's far enough away. If I'm close, then I tend to use this thing, or something like this. Usually, I'll only use this, and actually not even for real thin cuts, because I have a gripper also that I'll use for most things if I'm not using this one. So the table, the push stick, and the only other thing that I wish was a little more robust, the legs. The legs on this extension table. Now, they don't do much. They don't hold up really much weight. They're more support than anything else. But I do notice when I lift it and move it, set it back down, that they don't come down straight. One of them actually cants in quite a bit towards the other one, and the other one cants in this way. So, I have to kick them around just because it bothers me looking at them like that, and to get them straightened out. I mean, they work for what they're there for. They just, they could be better. So right off the top of my head, those are the only things. I mean, the thing cuts great. It's way, way quieter than the Hercules. I mean, I can't even compare them. I mean, I think I could probably use it without hearing protection, and it wouldn't be a problem at all. I wouldn't do that anyway, but I spent like 30 years around helicopters, so my hearing's bad as it is. I don't want it to get any worse, but it's not loud. The brake works really well. I've never had that experience before. When you turn it off, it stops within a couple of seconds. That one would take 10-15 seconds to stop. So far, so good. That's all I have for this time. So, Sawstop. What'd you guys think? Not too hard to put together. It's a good saw. We will be using it a lot from here going forward. In fact, I have a couple of big projects that I need to start now that I have this thing put together. So I'll be filming those as well. So look out for those videos. This one will end my series on putting the Sawstop together. I hope you got something out of it. I'm hoping that, some of the problems that I had with, the table or with the extension cord might help you out or help somebody out that you know. If you got any good information out of this, or just a few minutes of entertainment, whatever, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and the subscribe button and the bell icon and all those things that YouTube wants you to do to help the channel out. I'd really appreciate it if you did. But until next time, stay safe, happy woodworking, and I will see you again.